Welcome to Beaverdale Books for a wonderful evening with John T. Price. My name's Jan Kaiser, and before we get started, I have to do a little commercial because tomorrow, Saturday, noon to 5 at the Franklin Event Center, we are hosting the third annual Banned Books Festival. And we have Beth Macy. She is best known for her book Dope Sick, but you may have heard her on Talk of Iowa actually she was on Fresh Air. Yeah, she was on Fresh Air talking about her new book, Paper Girl. And we also have Erin Becker, who is a native Iowan who wrote a YA book that has been banned. It's about a girls' soccer team and a couple of 13-year-old girls who have a relationship. And she's going to talk about her experience. She now lives in Washington, D.C., and we are thrilled to be able to offer her. We also have Banned Book Shop. We have a blind date with a banned book. We have readings of banned poetry. We have vendors that are going to be there, ranging from Annie's Foundation with free books. And so come out. The whole event is free, plenty of parking. Come and enjoy just an afternoon learning about banned books.
What time are those two authors?
Erin is at 1 o'clock and Beth is at 2:30. And then at 4 o'clock, Annie's Foundation and one of the attorneys from the ISEA who are doing the lawsuit, they're going to give us an update on the current legislation and the current situation. So it should be fascinating afternoon. And then on Tuesday, we have a little event featuring Nick Offerman. If you don't know who Nick Offerman is, he was Ron Swanson on Parks and Rec. And he now has several woodworking books. And this is a family-friendly event. It is ticketed, but it's priced very family-friendly. And it should be so much fun. He is actually going to build a project on stage, and he is going to play his ukulele and tell jokes. So come out for that. Now it's my pleasure to introduce Anna McCracken, and I'm going to let her do the introduction of John.
Good evening and welcome everyone. As Jan said, I'm Anna McCracken of the Ames Writers Collective, which is located in Ames, Iowa. And we're a nonprofit 501c3 that creates healthy communities through the art of writing. We host workshops. We had John with us last night in Ames. And we also do generative writing groups for John Stoddard Cancer Center here in Des Moines and for kids at the Ames Public Library. So you can find us on ameswriterscollective.org. So now about John, who I met, and I guess you could kind of say I was a author stalker, because I showed up in Iowa City with a stack of his books and held up a line begging him to come to Ames in 2021 when he was there with another author, Hope Edelman, who I admire. And so he came. He's been to Ames twice, and we are so grateful to have had him with us. But if you're not familiar with his writing, John Price is the author of Not Just Any Land, a personal and literary journey into the American grasslands, Man-Killed Pheasant and Other Kinships, Daddy Longlegs, The Natural Education of a Father, and All Is Leaf, Essays and Transformations. Additionally, John is the Regents Foundation Distinguished Professor at the University of Nebraska at Omaha, where he directs the English Department's Creative Nonfiction Writing Program, and he's a faculty member in the Goldstein Center for Human Rights. When I asked John to do a posting for our website, I asked him what readers might like to know about, one thing that readers might like to know about him. And he said, beyond my family, the most important commitment of my life in writing is to place, to home, specifically, I'm going to get weepy, people, prairies, and the Oaklands of Iowa in the Midwest. Thank you, John, for joining us here tonight at Beaverdale Books.
Thanks, Anna. Is this good? Good? I feel very cool with this on here. It's very Star. Does it look good? Can someone take a picture, please? It's Star Trekkie. I love it. Well, first of all, thank you all for coming out on a Friday evening at 6:30. I know there are other options on a beautiful night like this, so I appreciate you being here. I'm so grateful to see my family here, my Uncle Denny, my Aunt Kay, my sister Susan, family friend Fred Breen, and high school friend Nancy. I know her as Nancy Clausen, but I'm so thrilled you're here, and everyone else who's been here too, and also online. Thank you for checking. And Jan, thank you so much, not just for inviting me here. I also said this to Anna last night, but just doing what you do as an independent bookstore owner. I mean, yes, the way that bookstores are, not just resources for literature, but as she mentioned, they're community builders, right? And bringing artists and authors to our communities. I'm so starstruck about this Ron thing. If my kids find out that this guy's going to be here, I may have to come back.
Okay.
We'll
let you.
He's awesome. So go to that if you have a chance. On a personal note, I just want to say, too, that I want to, those of you who have a book may have seen that this book is dedicated to my father, who passed away this summer. And my father was very supportive of my work as a writer, as a creative person. We all need people like that in our lives, and I've been lucky to have many of them, but my father certainly played a very important role in my life. And one of the great personal joys for me with this book was that he did get a chance to read it before he passed away, an earlier version of it, and it was his favorite books of all the books that I have written. So he would be here tonight if he were alive. So I just want to dedicate tonight's reading to him. This is a very different kind of book for me. As Anna mentioned, a lot of my books are about the Midwest, about the prairies, the nature of the Midwest, the environment of the Midwest, also about my family and growing up, and lots of people know about those stories that are here today. And also I often write humorous essays. That's sort of how I'm known as an environmental and nature writer, through my humor writing. This is none of those things, this book. And I hope those reasons become clear as I read through here. But I will say that one of the most unusual things about this book is it's about a tree. It is about a very famous tree that stood on the grounds of Buchenwald concentration camp in Germany. And it's told from the perspective of the tree and the voice of the tree. And I don't do that lightly, because as a nature writer, anthropomorphizing, where you impose the feelings and needs and desires of a human being on a non-human being, has led to all kinds of terrible things in the world, right? So I didn't do that lightly. But for me, creative nonfiction, I talk with my students a lot about this. One of its main purposes is to create compassion on the page, in the writing of it for the writer, but also hopefully for the reader as well. And I felt, and I'd written about this tree before in a piece that I published in Orion magazine, but it didn't feel right. It didn't feel like I was arriving at that kind of compassionate relationship with the subject here that I wanted. So I decided to write from the tree's perspective as a literature of witness, because that tree was in the camps. It did witness in its own way what happened there in Buchenwald, and it does deserve its own story. So I've tried to give it that through my limited imagination and ability with language. So that's a little bit of the background. Now I'm going to start, I'm going to read a little bit from the preface. You can see this is a very short book, and I'll talk about that a little bit, but I included this preface, the prologue, because it provides, I think, some essential historical and scientific context for this tree, which was probably 400 years old plus, English oak. Very famous, which I'll discuss in a bit. But also because I want this book to be taught. I want this to be shared with young people, and I've had the pleasure of teachers already using it in the classroom, and I'm getting feedback on that from students. And I wanted it to be a book where they could talk about those intersections of science and the humanities, which we need to hear more. We need to talk more about in the schools as well, because at least at my college, right, the sciences are over here and the humanities over there, and we need to bring them together. So, and then after that context, I'll read a few sections from the story. This story began for me during a 2015 visit to Buchenwald Memorial near Weimar, Germany. There, beside tributes to the concentration camp's human victims, I unexpectedly encountered a large tree stump upon which visitors had left hundreds of small stones, a tradition in Jewish culture intended to honor the souls of the dead. Nearby, a plaque read, Goethe Eiche, Goethe's oak. As a nature writer and as someone whose life has been profoundly affected by reading, studying, and teaching Holocaust memoirs, and by listening to survivors, I wanted to know more about this tree. What special meaning did it hold for Buchenwald's prisoners and for others that earned it such care and remembrance? Goethe's oak was a centuries-old English oak that once stood on the north slope of the Ettersberg, a forested Hausberg, or German for home mountain, rising over 1,600 feet above Weimar, Germany's famed city of music, art, and literature. Johann Wolfgang von Goethe, Friedrich von Schiller, and Johann Sebastian Bach were among the luminaries who once lived and resided there. English oaks are native to Northern Europe, and some have lived for more than 1,000 years. Indeed, for generations, this massive oak was well known to those walking the ancient trails of the Ettersberg, who rested in its shade and enjoyed the beautiful views. When the Nazis cleared the forest in 1937 to build Buchenwald, meaning beech forest, they spared the oak because of its great size and legendary status, a living symbol of what they considered to be Germany's superior strength and culture. And I'll just add here that one of the reasons that camp was one of the earlier camps in Germany. Why it was located there, why Hitler wanted it located there, was because of its proximity to Weimar, the great city of literature and music. And he saw the two to be part of the same effort, a kind of purification, right, of German culture. Literature and music over here, right, and what the concentration camp was doing over here. It was originally called the Ettersberg concentration camp, but because of its association with Goethe, the people actually protested that. They didn't want that association, but I'll talk about that more. But so they did. He changed to beech forest. But for the prisoners, this tree took on a very different kind of meaning. Many had undoubtedly heard the story, told for generations in Weimar and well beyond, that in 1776, the renowned Weimar poet and scientist, Goethe, sat beneath that same oak's branches to write his famous love poem, Wanderer's Night Song, about his unrequited love for Charlotte von Stein, whom he used to meet there. It is signed at the slope of the Ettersberg on 12th February, 76. I have included that imaginary moment, or that imagined moment, of Goethe's inspiration in this story, beneath that tree, along with the poignant verses of the poem itself, as famously translated by Henry Wadsworth Longfellow. Some prisoners would also have associated this poem with the melodic strains of Franz Schubert, who set it to music in 1815. So it was a very well-known poem, locally and beyond. Yes, it's incredible. And listen to it, and it's absolutely beautiful. And Goethe already at that time was a rock star, so a literary rock star. So Goethe's oak was the lone tree on the main grounds of Buchenwald, where numerous Jewish, Sinti and Roma, POW, and LGBTQ peoples, along with religious and political resistors, were imprisoned from 1937 to 1945. There were many children and teenagers in the camp, including a young Elie Wiesel and his father, who died there in 1945, and he writes about this in his famous book, Night. More than 56,000 people perished at Buchenwald. And one of them, by the way, was Dietrich Bonhoeffer, the famous Lutheran minister, who was one of the heroes of my father, and who he introduced me to his work and his life early on. He was part of the plot to assassinate Hitler, the failed plot. So he was kept at Buchenwald and executed, and I visited his cell there. Goethe's oak, as stated in the account of the tree at the Buchenwald Memorial, embodied for some prisoners quote, a legend, a bit of unharmed nature, a reminiscence of the world outside the camp. We can only imagine the details of these reminiscences, but it seems likely they would have included past scenes with family and friends, and solitary walks in natural beauty, perhaps reminiscence as well, amplified by Goethe's poem of romantic love and longing. For writer Ernst Weichert, imprisoned at Buchenwald in 1938, the tree and its poetic associations were a reminder of the higher principles that human beings might still be faithful to. In his autobiographical novel, Forest of the Dead, published in 1945, he wrote, "It took only a minute to reach the oak, which was said to have once cast its shadow over Goethe and Charlotte von Stein. It stood next to a camp road, the only place from which one could now see far out into the countryside. The moon was hanging above the wooded hills, and the last sounds of camp life were gradually subsiding. He looked down for a little while, as much alone as if he were the last man on earth. He tried to recollect all the verses he had known by him who, Goethe, perhaps, had stood upon this very spot some 150 years before. Nothing at all was lost of that great life, and even if at 50 years they had fettered him to a galley, nothing would have been lost. Noble, helpful, and good." These are lines from one of Goethe's famous poems. "Oh no, not even that was lost, as long as but a single man could say it to himself and try to preserve it and carry it to his last hour." Tragically, Goethe's oak was also at times a site of torture. Victims were bound to it for extended periods. It thus became known, for some, a symbol of Nazi brutality. And the prisoners used to call the surrounding forest there the singing forest, because this wasn't the only tree that they used to torture prisoners, and there would be sounds of suffering coming from that forest on the other side there. But whatever meaning individual prisoners gave the oak, the tree itself undeniably shared in their suffering, a fact that on its own might have evoked compassion and identification among the prisoners. Conditions on the ground, including the compression of the oak's roots and the lack of other plant life to help the soil retain water and reduce exposure, soon did the tree irreparable harm. Possibly as early as 1942, the oak was in the advanced stages of dying, and there remain no known photos of it in full foliage. There is, however, a small drawing of the tree with leaves labeled thick oak on a German camp map from 1941 to 1942. And I include that here in the opening, and you can see the tree prominently marked there on the German camp map. During an Allied bombing in August 1944 of a nearby munitions factory, Goethe's oak was severely damaged by an errant bomb, and it is said, burned through the night. Although there were casualties at the destroyed munitions factory, which was the target, where many prisoners were forced to labor, there were no human deaths from the accidental bombing of the camp itself. The oak alone was hit. What remained of in this way, Goethe's oak became yet another victim of Nazi brutality at Buchenwald. What remained of the tree's decimated body was felled by the order of camp commanders in the spring of 1945, shortly before General Patton's 3rd Army, 6th Armored Division liberated Buchenwald on April 4th of that year. And then Patton famously forced the mayor of Weimar to bring about 1,000 citizens up to make them see what would happen in the camp, assuming that they didn't know what was going on. He assumed wrongly. They absolutely knew what was happening there. One of the big surprises of my visit there was not just the tree, but on the other side of the camp fence, across from the crematorium, was a zoo where they kept animals, where kids would visit. People picnicked around those grounds. The prisoners worked in town. The crematoriums were built by a local company. So he was wrong to assume, and I think that's an important lesson here, right? that these horrible things happened right next door, and they absolutely knew they were happening and did nothing to stop it. The oak, nevertheless, lives on in the memories of the survivors and in their drawings and engravings, which were on display in the Buchenwald Memorial. This includes the image of a human face, a death mask, which writer Bruno Opitz secretly carved into a piece of wood from Goethe's oak while he was imprisoned at the camp in 1944. The Last Face, which is its title, is a powerful work of commemoration, directly linking the suffering and dignity of one body, one species, with another. Of Goethe's oak itself, at this point, it was already pretty much dead. This was late 1945, just before it was hit. And you'll see that usually you can see the reach of those branches. So it's lost a lot of those branches at this point, but there it is. Writing from the perspective, as I do, of Goethe's oak or any non-human being involves taking significant liberties. I have tried to do so with careful and respectful consideration. Part of that effort included learning more about recent scientific inquiries into the social lives of trees. At the forefront of that research is Suzanne Simard, professor of forest ecology at the University of British Columbia and author of Finding the Mother Tree, Discovering the Wisdom of the Forest. Professor Simard and others have determined that, far from being isolated, trees are connected to one another through vast underground networks of symbiotic fungi known as mycorrhizae. These intertwining fungal rivers, which I refer to in the story as living words, supply nutrients and water between trees, but also communicate warnings that trigger innate biological defenses. Although, like some humans, there are tree species that send out unfriendly, even toxic chemicals to discourage encroachment on their resources, black walnuts. Portrayed in this story, those trees are portrayed in this story as those who did not wish to connect, to share. Most feed and protect one another, and this is the key point, regardless of species. This is especially evident when they are dying, when they pass along what remains of their essential nutrients, as well as a kind of biological wisdom through these mycorrhizal networks to help vulnerable saplings survive, even those that aren't their direct offspring. Their final gift to future generations. As Professor Simard writes, when mother trees, the majestic hubs at the center of forest communication, protection, and sentience, die, they pass their wisdom to their kind, generation after generation, sharing the knowledge of what helps and what harms, who is friend or foe, and how to adapt and survive in an ever-changing landscape. It's what all parents do. What Professor Simard refers to as a mother tree is often the largest and oldest in a tree in a particular area of forest, a tree that plays an essential role in that ecosystem's extensive network of interdependency. Although I refer to the mother tree in this story as the female one, oaks are not biologically gendered. Each has both male and female flowers. This ancient being, like any good parent or guardian, is most capable of nurturing and protecting newer generations of trees. Foresters are learning to identify and preserve such trees for the benefit of the surrounding forest, the ecological health of which noticeably diminishes in their absence. This includes as well the oak's capacity to feed and otherwise sustain countless multitudes of other species, among them a diversity of insects, birds, and both small and large mammals. It is quite literally a tree of life. In his book, The Nature of Oaks, The Rich Ecology of Our Most Essential Native Trees, Douglas Tallamy, professor of entomology and wildlife biology at the University of Delaware, refers to oaks as, quote, top life support trees, and states, no other tree genus supports so much life. This research informed many of the characteristics I attributed to Goethe's oak, likely itself a mother tree, including sensitivity to physical interactions with humans and other creatures. Although it is unclear in what ways a tree might perceive the presence of a human being, through physical touch or chemical signals, such as sweat or breath or tears, such awareness is a very real possibility. In fact, some studies have shown that trees may actually grow toward the sound of running water. They can sense the presence, the nearby wings of insects, and can sweeten their flowers to attract them. I mean, the discoveries that they're making now about the sentience of trees in that way are really mind-boggling. Less certain is how long and in what form remnants of mycorrhizal fungi that once connected a mother tree to her offspring remain after her death. Do trees retain some other kind of lasting biological memory of a parent? Whatever science determines, as someone who recently lost a parent, I choose to believe that such memory does exist within trees, as it does within other sentient beings, as it does within me. Although the main character of my story is not human, the meaning of its life was enriched by the many emotions and memories that humans attached to it during its years in the camp. Enriched as well by Goethe's poem, a testament to the ways that art has the power to deepen, sometimes unintentionally, our connection to nature and to each other, reminding us of our humanity and sustaining us during very difficult times. By remembering and reimagining the life of this single and extraordinary tree, I seek to honor the millions of people who suffered and died at Buchenwald and elsewhere during the Holocaust. I also wish to acknowledge the countless and largely untold losses sustained by non-human beings. Suffering does not recognize the boundaries among the living during wartime, if it ever does. We are fortunate that Holocaust survivors gave witness to their experiences and to those of others, in the hope that they might not be repeated. These heroes left, often at great cost to themselves and their loved ones, an invaluable gift to future generations. Unfortunately, other life forms did not leave such words of witness, at least not in any language we can readily understand. As Elie Wiesel observed in 2009, while revisiting Buchenwald alongside Barack Obama and Chancellor Angela Merkel, quote, "If these trees could talk." In seeking to give voice to Goethe's oak, I have only my limited knowledge and language and imagination to rely upon. I have tried nonetheless to honor the spirit of this being who lessened, even for a moment or two, perhaps beyond any conscious awareness, as nature so often does, the loneliness and suffering of so many. May we be inspired to do the same. Thank you. So that's some of the prologue before I get to the story. I'd be happy to talk a little bit more about the decisions that went into how I wrote it, how it looks on the page, and I won't go into too much detail at this point, but I will show you that each page looks like this. There's a short block of prose over here, written from the perspective of the tree, and then over here, minimalist illustration. The book designer, Sarah from Iowa City, brilliantly put together these acorns, leaves, and positioned them in such a way to reflect the emotions that were going on here. And then it's supposed to look like natural paper on that side, and also to be kind of a meditative space as well. So that's how it looks. One of the other decisions I had to make, and again I can talk about my reasons for that in a little bit, but where to start the story, right? Do I start at that moment with Goethe underneath the tree that gave it its name, made it famous? Do I start at the camp, right? There would have been an entire book to write about that, possibly. But I thought if I were writing about a human being, of course I would start with his childhood, right? With their childhood, the family, right? Those who loved them, nurtured them, the experiences they had growing up. It's part of recognizing the beingness of a human being, right? Recognizing that it does have a story that goes beyond the camps. Just like the humans that were imprisoned here. The camp doesn't define their lives. They had so much of their life before that camp. And I wanted to somehow capture that as well for this tree. Again, through my own research and imagination. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to read a few panels here from the very beginning. By the way, this can be read out loud in less than 20 minutes. So, and that was intentional. I want this to be read out loud. I want it to be taught. I want it to be shared. I want it to be experienced in one sitting, ideally. So I'll read a couple panels here at the beginning, and then I'll read that moment when Goethe is underneath the tree, and you'll hear me move into his poem, the famous one. And then I'll end with some of the time in the camp. This is the very start. Life begins with a stirring inside, an unfamiliar longing to grow, to change, to become whatever you are meant to be in the time and place you are given. For me, that place was an ancient forest on a mountain called Ettersberg. My home there, in this beginning, was an elemental darkness. But I sensed the light beyond. I sensed, too, a mysterious giving. From where it flowed, I did not know, only that it was there, and it was good, and it was not me, not yet. I felt the sky before I ever knew it, the light, the warmth, the immensity I was born to reach. But first and always I had to reach within and down toward the source of giving. Others were there. I was not alone. They surrounded me, providing, helping, guiding, especially she who created me, the One. I felt her presence most of all. She told me in her own way that this place in the dark was my first and my final home, that it would always hold and sustain me. Here, among the many of our kind, you must never let go of this home. Never forget. But I was young and impatient to grow. I broke through the surface. The light, overwhelming at first, became gentle warmth. The stirring of life continued. New parts of me were born. Each drop of light settled like dew on my first leaves, and I drank it in. I wanted more, but others stood between me and the greater light, the sun. I did not understand that they were protecting me from the high, cold winds, from the heat, striving to give me what the sun provides. I wanted only what they had. The One was still there, in the depths below, the sky above. Her giving was stronger because I was part of her. She would help me reach the sky, the clouds. She would never leave me. I sensed this promise from her. With each new season, I was becoming what I was meant to be. Some would call me an oak, but we are not what we are called. We are not the words others use to name us. We are ourselves, never fully known, even to us, like the sky above, the depths below. There is always more to become. We may think we know what we were before, in the beginning, but can we really know? When did this beingness begin? Perhaps in a long ago moment, rooted among the stars. Another kind of being, not of the forest, visited us more often. Each walked lightly above our roots, but they could also bring thunder and suffering. We knew when they had taken one of our own. We felt each one fall, its pain, its final giving. But some of these beings sat beneath my branches and did not take. The warmth of their bodies against mine, though I was armored against fire, could still be felt. Their song heard, and it was good, especially on cool nights under the moonlight when they lay beside me alone or with others before the vastness beyond the Ettersberg. During such a night, near spring awakening, one of these beings lingered and leaned against me. The air was still cold, my leaves not yet born. Even so, I sheltered him from the north wind. I drank the water of his tears. Upon a dry leaf, he made his own living words, speaking them aloud to the darkness. Thou that from the heavens art, every pain and sorrow stillest, and the doubly wretched heart, doubly with refreshment fillest, I am weary with contending. Why this rapture and unrest? Peace descending, come, ah, come into my breast. It was less than a moment in my long life, this visit, this wanderer's night song. It did not feel different, just the warmth of another being sitting or sleeping or dying beneath my limbs. So many, but like a seed, it would become something more. There came a day when one of these beings was bound to my body, as others had been. The binding cut deep into my flesh, sharpening the thirst, the pain. The body against mine shook, bent in ways it should not be bent. Tears fell onto my exposed roots, and I drank them in. They became part of me. After nightfall, one of these beings returned, alone, touching my wounds from the endless binding. The moon hung above the great open. A breeze caressed my leaves. The beings slid deeper into the shadow of my body, trembling, pressing their warmth close to me. I felt their breath upon my bark, heard their whispered song, their living words. Thou that from the heavens art, every pain and sorrow stillest. And then it seemed without choosing, there came from inside me another kind of giving, different from any I had known, an invisible sustenance, a comfort, a promise, you are not alone. Across a few seasons more, the beings kept drawing near for shade, for warmth, and for something else. They sang aloud the living words in different voices. The doubly wretched heart, I am weary with contending. Some words were not sung aloud, though they were just as alive, silent echoes of what makes a spirit breathe or mourn, tears unforced, born as naturally as rain is born. Why this rapture and unrest? Echoes of what we are or should be, a gentle touch, a promise, peace descending, of those once loved, now beyond reach, the longing to be near them again, one with them again, bodies entwined in joy beneath this same jeweled light, breezes dancing in the leaves, countless night songs. Come, ah, come into my breast. All this and more I was giving over to them without trying, stirring what remains of the life within, even in this place of death. Very faint, as when life first stirred within me. Could it be? It was only a trickle of her living words, but it was enough for me to know, the one. She had never left me. She had kept her promise, and so had I, becoming like her, what I was meant to become, doing what I was meant to do in the given place and time. Being who had lifted their eyes, drank their tears, helped them live. You must never let go, never forget, peace descending. Upon my remnant body they have placed stones that are like acorns, seeds. From them something beautiful has grown, and it is still becoming, here and elsewhere, inside all those who hold to the earth, yet reach for the light, all who shelter and comfort others, softening their scars, all who defy the merciless, the cruel, challenging names and the so-called inevitable, all who suffer that even a few might be saved, all who love far into the depths, no loss, yet love again and again, all who remember and become the living words, the promise kept, the one. For us, such giving is not always a choice. Sometimes it is just being what we are meant to be, leaves among the clouds, roots among the stars. Thank you.
That was beautiful.
Thanks, Jan.
Wow.
Thank you.
Mesmerized.
Well, I can tell you it was a difficult book to write, probably the most difficult book I ever wrote. It's the shortest, but it took me 10 years.
So when you went to the camp, Did you know anything about the tree?
Nothing at all.
You were just visiting.
No. Actually, the opening chapter in All Is Leaf, which I'm so pleased that you have here, is about that story. About going to Germany to see a friend of mine from college, but also to research an essay I was writing about Goethe and his nature writing. Because I'm a nature writer and his science, and I was going to write something for Orion magazine. And while there, even though as an undergraduate at the University of Iowa as a religion major, one of my major focuses then was Holocaust memoir. In fact, I credit Primo Levi, author of Survival in Auschwitz, as the book that turned me into a nonfiction writer. I read it when I was a sophomore in college. I was a science major at that point. The first work of literature I'd ever read that was intended, as it was taught to me, to be a moral force in the world, not just a piece of writing on the page, but to change people from the inside out. It was a powerful act of witness. I didn't know literature could do that. So
What was that author and?
it's Primo Levi, Levi, Survival in Auschwitz, and it was written in the late 1940s. It was shortly after Auschwitz was liberated. I eventually left the science and became a writer, but what was unusual about that trip was I did not intend to go to that camp. In fact, I was kind of resistant in some ways because I knew to go there, I felt like I almost hadn't earned it. You know, it is such a powerful side of remembrance. But in the end, I was telling a story last night too with Anna's group. I decided in just a moment of impromptu, really, I saw the last bus to Buchenwald that evening was leaving, and I got a ticket and got on that bus and went there to visit. Completely open and didn't do very little research about Buchenwald. I knew very little about that camp. And yeah, there was this stump and there, that story. Couldn't find anything that had been written about it before. Now, there's been a few other things that have come out since then. There's a Wikipedia page now. There wasn't at the time that I was there.
Did you write it?
I did not write it. I promise. I promise.
No one will ever tell.
Nope, I never wrote it. But the camp historians were so helpful. Both while I was there, I think they were thrilled to have someone asking about the tree because it was so important to the prisoners. It was so, I didn't really understand how important it was until I saw the images and the paintings and the artwork that were in the memorial. And then that the prisoners had painted, both while they were there and after they left. The tree was clearly at the center of how they thought about life there in the camps. And the memorial medallion that prisoners created on the memorial of its liberation also prominently featured that tree. And then years later, when I was working on this book, the camp historian sent me a wealth of information, what photos, information, interviews, other things that they had. So they've been very helpful, and I'm hoping to go there again and share this book with them. Yeah, Anna.
I've heard you read now 2 evenings in a row, and it's so meditative and distilled down. And I'm very familiar with your writing, and as you told us last night, you're a verbose essay writer, right? And how did that's such a switch for you, and where. It's last night I said you had 20 chapters or pages for this, and how did you, pick which part of it to write, and how did you switch that voice that you have? You know what I mean?
Yeah,
that's a huge switch for you, right?
Yeah, it was, and probably one of the main challenges of the book was, not just where to begin the story, but how to write the story. I don't know what a tree sounds like. I don't know what a tree voice, right? So I felt like I had to move more in the direction of poetry, right? That language that embodies meaning as well as communicates the meaning, right? So I don't, as I mentioned last night, I don't presume to call myself a poet. I respect those who are trained in that area and have done that work. But
Well, you are now.
well, thank you.
I think so.
But I do. I hope I get a certificate. Say I'm a poet.
Nobel Prize.
Yeah. Oh, geez. Yeah, I don't think so. But Now I've been derailed.
I didn't mean to do that.
No, that's those sweets. But yes, I moved in the direction of lyric nonfiction, which is what I would call it. Like people have asked me, is this historical fiction? Is it nonfiction? Is it prose poetry? Is it? My answer is it's all of those in some way, right? Like an ecosystem, right, that relies on diversity. I wanted the prose to be something that crossed those boundaries that was hard to define and label. So, but I think of it as lyric, creative nonfiction. So the sound matters, where the words are on the page matter, the line breaks matter. I read it out loud many hours and listening to how the words sound, rearranging them, trying to understand what belonged and what didn't belong in that story, what drug it down, what it, that kind of thing. But it's also, I was talking about this last night, it's supposed to look like a tree trunk to some extent, like almost like oak bark on the page. And that, I don't mention that in the prologue at all, but I wanted to have that kind of heft in texture visually as well as what it said on the page. And then, of course, the images over here of the acorns and the... but it took me a very long time to find my way into it. I wrote it, I rewrote it, it was blown up into a big narrative, and it was shrunk back down again, finally arriving here.
So did you have an author or lyric poets that you went to study, or you just, no?
Well, yeah, actually, there were a few. One of my favorites is Patricia Hampel.
Right.
Some of you may know her. She's the MacArthur Award-winning poet and nonfiction writer from Minnesota, former teacher of mine. One of my, most memorable and important teachers. She wrote a really small book. She was so far ahead of her time. Before lyric nonfiction was even a term that was being talked about in academic programs and elsewhere. She wrote a little book called Spillville, about Spillville, Iowa, and Dvorak, right? Yeah, and his, the famous composer who wrote New World Symphony, who went there, right, because it was a Czech community, and wrote some of that New World Symphony there, but mostly some other things there. And it's all about Spillville, and it looks just very much like this on the page, just very short. Right? And I love that book. I was just a new writer. I was just beginning, but I didn't quite know how to articulate it. But here she was writing about music and place and landscape and nature, and then she tried to create it on the page through the music of her prose. So that was a book that I went back to and referred to. But there are others. Kathleen Norris, author of Dakota, Spiritual Geography. She's an author of a number of other books. Amazing writer. But in Dakota, it was probably her most famous book. She has these little weather reports. Do you remember those? They're like these little paragraphs, lyric prose that are about some aspect of the landscape or the people, and they're about that length too. So yeah, I relied on my teachers. Went back to that. Yes, Fred.
The name Buchenwald refers to a forest.
Yes, beech forest. Yep.
Is that a big forested area?
It was, and a very famous forest. In fact, those trails go way back to some of the earliest humans on the continent. And
What happened to the trees?
the Nazis cleared a lot of it for the camp. But where they lived and around that area outside the camp, they did keep some of those trees. And so even though, someone asked me this at another reading, are there any offspring of this tree that have been replanted or regrown somewhere else? And the answer is no one knows for sure, right? Not that anyone knows, but those trees that are on that other side of the fence were likely some of her offspring, those big oak trees. And I just spent part of my time just photographing those trees because they were just, you know how oaks are, right? They're so distinct. They're like, they look like upside down trees in a way because their branches are rooted out, right? And they have these, they're gnarled in really interesting ways. And but now that it is quite forested up there, and still is. The camp itself is almost entirely clear of as it was when the prisoners were there.
Was it obviously the tree was a historic tree before the war?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Were there buildings around there, and what were they? Were they churches? Were they?
Not originally before the war. It was just on the edge of that slope of the Ettersberg. And because it was a beech forest, primarily, it stood out as an oak tree.
I see.
There were oaks there too, but it was this, and it was marked on a lot of the old, the dukes and duchesses that would roam there and walk there and hunt there. It was often marked on their maps as the fat oak. That's what the Germans had called it, that on the thick oak on the map. So it was very, very famous and well known to people who walked those nature trails even before the camp was there. But yeah, the Nazis preserved it because of that history.
Do you know why that was chosen for the camp?
Well, it's association with Goethe, I think. Again, that cultural purification project. It was meant as a symbol of Nazi power and strength. The highest award, the military award you can get from the Nazis, included the oak leaves, right? So it's an old symbol that goes back in their culture. But again, it became something quite different for the prisoners, right? Now, some of them did associate with Nazi power and weren't sorry to see it die because it was a symbol of that Nazi power. That's important knowledge.
There's a kind of mysticism about forests,
Yes.
fairies, and
Oh yeah.
imaginary folk, and
Oh yeah. That indigenous Northern European.
that is
Religion.
Germany, that's everywhere.
Yeah. Yeah. Those sacred groves of trees. This was certain. I guess you would call this a sacred tree to many, just because it was so prominent and been there for so long. One of the interesting things about the camp, though, when I went there, I didn't mention this, but one of the surprising things, the Nazis would always put quotes on the gates of the camp, right? I think Auschwitz is something like to right, work to be free, or what's the
Work will set you.
work? Yeah, that's right, exactly.
I love that there was a chorus of that
Yeah.
assistance you just got.
Yeah,
Like,
yeah,
they
yes.
were just like, they were right with you.
Yes, and this camp, the quote above the gate was "to each his own," and of course the meaning of that was superior races survive and live outside these camp walls. The inferior, what you are experiencing in this camp is something you deserve because of what you are in that hierarchy. To each his own. But what I think is one of the powerful messages of this tree, and why it meant so much to the prisoners, and why the science is so, I think, important, is that it's an example of another way of existing and coexisting with one another. Trees don't just take care of their own. It's not to each his own for a tree. The tree take care of other species. They take care of those who are not their offspring because they recognize that diversity, as in the human community, is essential to health of the forest. And they model, they give to one another, they reciprocate, they collaborate. We're taught, that, mostly about how our competitive nature is who we are, right? That's what we evolved, the survival of the fittest. But I think these trees and what the prisoners were recognizing as well, even in the midst of all that terror and horror, that there was another possibility for how we connected and interacted with another. And the poem was an example of that too. It represented what we could be, the best of what we could be as human beings. And that was a reminder that was desperately needed inside those walls. So, yes, that's a long answer to your question, Fred, but yes.
I'm a huge science dork, right? So
Okay, good.
I was thinking about the other trees and how the other trees would be different and the poem would be different, and wondering if you're planning on starting to crank out some sequels.
Wow, that's a great question. I don't, I guess I don't know.
I have some trees where you could go, and the biggest one that has been on my mind while I was listening was the magnolia adjacent to Violet Bank Library
I don't
in
know
Colonial
this.
Heights, Virginia, where I grew up. And we would ride our bikes there because, you just ride your bike somewhere, right?
Yeah.
And have a picnic and ride home. And while it wasn't a concentration camp, what happened in the vicinity of that tree during the Civil War would be right what you're doing.
Yeah.
But then I couldn't think how the poem would change. Like, is this a poem about spirituality?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Or does that tree matter?
The tree absolutely matters. The point of the book is to acknowledge and honor that tree's life, but it is also about, and I want it to be about larger issues in the human world. It was written during it took me 10 years to write it, but most of the writing took place during the pandemic in 2020, spring of 2020. And one of the things, a reason I think, to go back to your question, Anna, why I focused on certain aspects of this tree's life, and that aspect of being who we are, right, and how the tree helps the prisoners, not by any conscious decision, but just by being what it is, right, a tree, and all the associations that it has. We were witnessing all kinds of people during that time period, weren't we, that were, because of who they are, were putting themselves in harm's way to take care of people, to treat people, to heal people. Teachers, nurses, right? First responders, others. So I felt like this story, although about a tree, I was hoping it would also speak to people, who know people like that, or people like that themselves, and also honor that within us, as well as honoring it within this particular tree. And there's a spiritual dimension to that, for sure, I think. Yeah.
Did religious ideas of faith, ideas of ethics pass through your mind as you were putting words on the page?
Yeah.
Repeat the question.
Oh, sure. I'm sorry. The question is, did religious ethics, philosophy, texts enter my mind when I was writing the book? Well, as a religion major, I can't, I'm always thinking about, I love the poetry of the sacred texts. I don't care what the tradition is, right? Some of it is so beautiful, and it's so anchored in physical experience while reaching also, much of it, reaching for a larger spiritual experience. So, did that enter into how I wrote this? I don't know. I don't think necessarily consciously.
That's what I was
Yeah, right. But, yeah, I mean...
It doesn't come out in the writing.
Yeah.
I suppose a minister or somebody sermonizing about what you wrote could import some ideas into it.
I hope so. That'd be awesome.
John,
Sure.
can you talk a little bit about how you got this published? Because
Yeah.
was Steve, was he the editor?
Yes, he was.
Yes.
She's talking about Steve Semkin at Ice Cube Press. Some of you aren't familiar with it. I hope you become familiar with Ice Cube, because it's an amazing independent press here in Iowa, located in North Liberty. It's a real labor of love on the part of Steve, and they put out some very important books that were very influential on me, often focusing on environmental justice and social justice in Iowa and in the Midwest. Published a lot of the Midwestern state poets and others. So it was a press that I had long admired and hoped to be able to work with. But this book went through a lot of different journeys, and there were another press that offered, but I actually turned it down because I didn't think it was being treated in the way that I wanted it to be treated. Now, if any other book, I might have said, sure. But this book is special, and I didn't want, I felt like I was more of a steward of the story than I was the writer of the story. And then Steve heard about it, and we began a conversation. It became clear to me that he was going to treat this story in the way that I wanted it to be treated, with love and respect and integrity. And he's created a beautiful book here. This cover...
Beautiful.
I mean, this is also kind of a great story. The book designer in Iowa City, while she was thinking about how to put this book together, she saw this painting on the wall of another independent bookstore, Prairie Lights bookstore in Iowa City, And it just was there, sort of like the stump was when I went to the camp. And she said, "There's the cover." Young artist Ezra Edgerton from Michigan. So I couldn't be happier with the way
What's
that
the
this book's
species
treated.
of the tree in the painting?
That's a great question. I want it to be oak-like. It's not named oak, but to me it does look like an oak. That bark, the age, the growths on the tree, the lichen. But what I was really drawn to is that most of the painting's underground. I mean, it's the roots, right? And that's what the book's about. Those connections, right? The interconnections. So.
I learned about oaks by planting 3 little things that had grown from acorns in a triangle, thinking that I wanted to raise a new oak, but I should put 3 down and chop down 2 that didn't do as well as the third one. And they got maybe the height of this chair. And I thought, well, now's the time to winnow it out and pick one and whatnot. Well, I discovered that oaks are all about roots.
Yeah.
And this very much says that.
Yeah. Before they even come to the ground, the roots are.
The first thing a oak does is puts down a great big root.
Yep.
And you try to move that thing, and it's impossible.
Were you able to? Did you get to move it?
No, no.
They say that the oak species is essentially a mirror image. The root system is equal as above. They also say that the redwoods don't have roots that go deep. Have you
I guess I don't know that.
So they finger lock with each other.
Really?
Which is just super weird.
That's fascinating. They're like they're holding hands almost and holding each other up.
So their mycelial underground communication is also there, but they're directly communicating with each other.
Oh, I love that.
Well, and I think this book, when I read it, John, it reminded me afterwards, I like the meditative piece, because in reading it afterwards, I thought of all the trees I had a relationship with in my life. The trees in our yard.
Well, that's an amazing compliment, because that's what I'm hoping this will lead us to do, is to appreciate those trees in our life that we sometimes take for granted around us. I mean, we're lucky enough to have in our yard, you've seen it, a 300-year-old bur oak. I know that was there pre-settlement, because the bur oak branches will go out in a horizontal direction, right, if they were there before settlement, because it was the savanna, so there would be grass there and not other trees. So the newer oaks will have their branches up like this, because other trees are moving in, and it's perched right on the top of the hill where we live. And I don't know if I'd written this book or been without that tree, without the presence of that tree. We had another one there, but one of the complications is that I love them so much that I can't cut them down, even the babies. And so we have a small forest that's growing up there, and the neighbors are, that's going to go into the telephone wires. I'm like, well, that's the telephone wires problem, not the trees.
Do you know that tree, Buchenwald, did it rot down to a stump, or did they cut it?
They cut it after it had already died at that point, or was near dead, because trees die from the top down, right? That's why I talk about it being beneath the ground. So whether there was still something alive, but it was felled after it got struck by that bomb, it was felled and cut off. That's a great question, because Weimar actually ended up in East Germany, and there were a number, many. Buchenwald wasn't technically a death camp, even though 56,000 people. It's not like Auschwitz where people were sent there to be executed. Right? They were worked to death. They died of disease. They died of dysentery, other things, starvation. But the group that it was a death camp for were the Russian POWs. They were sent there to be executed. In fact, it was a desensitization training ground for young Nazi guards, many of whom were 16 or 17 years old. They desensitized them by allowing them to execute Russian prisoners, and then sent them to the other camps to do even more of that work. So it was the Russians, actually, that preserved that trunk and made sure, it's encased, right, in some ways. There's remnants of the wood there and everything else, but it's been preserved by them.
A friend of mine went to Buchenwald, changed his life.
Oh, yeah. When did he go?
It's been quite a while back.
Yeah.
The other thing is that scene from Patton taking people to the camp. I'm familiar with that. I've seen it in movies.
Yep.
But it just says that silence is deadly.
Yeah. Yeah. They knew.
What were they supposed to do?
They absolutely knew.
They knew.
But I mean, that asks the question, right? What would we do in that situation? Would you speak up? Would you? I mean, there's a lot of fear.
Just like the soldiers that had the guard be in the camp. I mean, they were following orders.
It's a powerful question to ask ourselves. We think we might be one way or the other, but we don't know ultimately. But Hitler loved Weimar. That's sort of as someone who believes in the humanities and the power of the humanities, that can be the flip side of it, right? He adored Weimar and gave one of his most famous speeches early on in his rise to power there. In the hotel that he stayed in, the balcony he stood on is still there. There's a statue now of Luther there instead of, but those, I was having dinner with some of the locals, but they put Luther there to distract you, but that's where Hitler stood, and showed the photograph of him standing there with all the people. He was paraded to the streets like a hero there. So it's complicated. But I think those two need to be visited together, Weimar and Buchenwald, because there's a conversation going on there. I think that's really
That's why
important.
we can't be silent today.
Yes, exactly. The Weimar Republic started there, right? The first democratic elected German government started there. So there's that other side to it. The Bauhaus Art Museum.
Germany had a strong democracy.
Yeah, right. And that was there too. So it was all these things, right? Which makes it so complicated and interesting. And
Was Elmar with you?
no, Elmar is my sister asked if Elmar, my good friend who I was visiting, he was my graduate school friend, native German from Hamburg. He was not there with me. But he did tour the Holocaust Museum with me in New York. And that was a very interesting, or Washington, D.C., sorry. That was a very interesting experience to be alongside him. Anyone visited the Holocaust Museum? And yeah, it's a very unique experience, isn't it? It's a physical experience. It's talk about the power of personal story. When you go through, you'll get a little passport with the name of someone who experienced the Holocaust. And in each station you move through, you can get an update on what was happening for that person in that year. And some of them make it. Right? Mine that I had, I can remember it vividly. This is how powerful personal story is wedded to historical details. Ended up in Denver. The one that Elmore had did not make it out. But it's meant to make you physically uncomfortable. You move in out of hot and cold there. You're crowded into an elevator that looks like a train car. You have to look at displays. You have to look down at them so everyone's crowded around. It's a very, very different kind of experience, but I thought appropriate and powerful.
Yeah, different style of story.
Yeah, right. But Elmore ended up writing a piece about that, about his family's, which took a lot of guts. I thought, he's like, as a German, of course I wasn't there when this happened. I wasn't responsible for the Holocaust, but everywhere I go, I carry around that historical context with me, and so I have some responsibility to address it, right, and have an opinion about it. So he went back and researched that with his grandparents. Hamburg was firebombed, if you remember. And he found a picture of his grandparents picnicking on the beach with the Nazi flags in the background. And that was such a powerful, because his parents never talked that way, but this idea that ordinary life was taking place as this, atrocity was beginning to happen, while this man was rising to power.
Kind of like today in America, huh?
Well, they didn't have television.
Right.
All they had were radios that Hitler passed out.
Yeah.
That's all they heard.
Yeah. Well, the museum, I got to hand it to the Germans. They are very honest about that history. In their museum there, they displayed the list of names of people who made claims on the Jewish homes that had been vacated. That was part of why some supported the removal of Jewish citizens, because they would get their property. And they named them. on there. So it was a very powerful experience there. But I'm sorry, Jan, you were
All right.
asking me.
Well, time is
Oh, sorry.
of the
I could
essence.
stay.
I know we could. I think we all could, but we do close at 8.
Oh,
so.
shoot.
So thank you, John.
Thank you so much. Thank you for being here.
And you'll be signing copies.
Absolutely, I'm happy to sign this book or all his leaf too. There's a few copies here, so yeah, absolutely. Thank you for being here.
Oh, thank you.